The truth is seeping through now, and it can no longer be suppressed. In the end, this tale becomes a matter of choice. You can accept it, or you can reject it. You might see it as a tangled mixture of history, rumor, and speculation, or as a rare glimpse into the hidden machinery running our world. But let me ask you this: if such a force truly existed, one capable of halting time, erasing people, and reshaping history, would the world look any different from the one we inhabit? A world riddled with unexplained inequality, with dynasties that seem unshakable, with secrets stretching back through generations, where official accounts never quite align. Perhaps the Fellowship's greatest deception wasn't in making the world doubt their existence, but in convincing us that this broken, manipulated version of reality is the only one possible. They normalized their monstrosity, turning their prison into our reality. Dr. Finch died believing he had failed. He ended his life alone, disgraced in an asylum, his work dismissed, his name ruined. He never knew if his writings would ever surface. He never knew whether anyone would uncover the truth. Yet, he persisted. He stood firm. He recorded everything in the desperate hope that someone, someday, would listen. And tonight we have listened. We have honored his courage, heard Clara's whispers, the cries of Alara and Isolde, the silent scream of Thomas, and remembered Lenora. We've tugged at a single dark thread and seen how it weaves through everything. What we gain from this knowledge is not peace, but a chilling clarity. It is a burden, but also a weapon. It is light, and light is the one thing darkness cannot endure. Use it well. My investigation is far from over. It has only just begun. Finch's journal names others, other families, other branches of the Stygian Fellowship. Their reach extends far beyond Boston, into New York, into London, into the very corridors of global power. The story of the Callahan sisters is only the prologue. There are more experiments, more victims, more secrets waiting in the shadows, and I will keep pulling at those threads. I will not stop until the entire decaying structure is brought into the light. But this can't be done by one person alone. This demands a collective, a community of seekers willing to pierce the veil. That's where you come in. Do not remain passive. Become investigators yourselves. Dig into your local histories. Look at families with no clear origin. Notice the strange coincidences, the convenient deaths, the vanished records. The Fellowship wasn't confined to Boston. They spread, they partnered, they left markers. The serpent and the lotus, their chosen symbol, may appear in places you least expect, carved into a cornerstone, hidden in a logo, painted in the stained glass of a church. These are their quiet declarations of control. They believe they own our past. They believe they own our future. It's time to prove them wrong. Truth is dangerous, but it is also the only key to freedom. What I've given you tonight is my first offering. There will be others. The ghosts of the past have found their voice, and they will not fall silent again. Change is coming. And so, what are you left with? A grim tale of a forgotten corner of history. But it feels like more, doesn't it? That cold recognition deep in your stomach. The sense that this, in some strange way, is true. Not every detail, not every name perhaps, but the essence. The belief that hidden powers exist, that secret systems operate beyond our sight. This resonates because it touches something primal. Humanity has always suspected that the world is not as it seems, that unseen hands tug the strings. The Callahan story gives that suspicion a face and a shape. It provides a frame to make sense of what otherwise feels inexplicable. And that is why it is so potent. It validates an ancient suspicion that we are not alone at the summit of creation. That predators walk among us, indistinguishable in appearance, but operating by different appetites. Predators who feed not on flesh but on time, on vitality, on the future itself. This story isn't meant to paralyze you with fear. It is meant to ignite anger. Righteous anger. The anger of the deceived. The anger of the exploited. But anger is fuel, and fuel can become fire. Fire that drives vigilance, fire that fuels the demand for truth. The world is dark, yes, but never hopeless. A single candle can drive back the night. Finch was a candle, Clara was a candle, and now you are a candle. Together, those small flames can become a blaze they will never extinguish. The story no longer belongs to me. It belongs to all of us. And here is the most chilling thought of all: the Fellowship's greatest secret may not be their ability to suspend time. It may be what they learned from it. For a century and a half, they had a front row seat to the stagnant consciousness of the Callahan sisters. They studied them, monitored them, dissected their existence. What did they learn? They learned how memory works, how personality is constructed, how the mind can be confined, manipulated, rewritten. Their technology to master the body was only the first step. The true prize was always the mastery of the mind, and I believe they have achieved it. That is why our world feels fractured, why confusion reigns, why anger is so easily inflamed. We are being distracted, divided, and manipulated, because we are living inside their grandest experiment. The lessons they extracted from two trapped girls in a Beacon Hill mansion have now been scaled to an entire population. We are all held in a kind of suspended state, trapped in cycles of outrage and diversion. Their nightingale song has gone digital, and it is binding us all. The tale of Alara and Isolde is not just a forgotten tragedy. It is a blueprint for our present condition. Their timeless prison has grown to hold us all. And now you know, there are places in this world so saturated with memory, so heavy with sorrow, that even the earth seems to hold its breath. Deep within the sweltering, tangled heart of Louisiana's Point Noir parish once stood a great house, a monument to a dream that had decayed into a nightmare. In the autumn of 1931, a young physician named Alistair Finch stood before its smouldering remains. The Belrev plantation burned behind him, its last embers casting a dim glow across his face. The air, thick with wet ash and scorched cypress, carried the faint echo of a secret the flames had tried to erase. Yet fire, for all its fury, cannot consume everything. Among the blackened beams and shattered porcelain, Dr. Finch discovered something that defied all reason. A single specimen jar had survived, its glass cracked, clouded with soot, yet still intact. Suspended in murky yellow fluid inside was something no living man should have found. It was a hand, an infant's hand, but its fingers were too long, unnaturally slender, and linked by translucent webbing, like a bat's wing or an amphibian's foot. Finch's mind raced to classify what he was seeing, but the horror lay not in the deformity itself. It was in the deliberate precision of its design. This was no freak of nature. It was the product of a will so patient, so monstrous, that generations had been sacrificed to bring it into being. The von Armfeld family was gone, devoured by the fire they likely lit themselves, but their work remained floating silently in that jar, a testament to a forbidden lineage whispered about only in hushed tones in Point Noir parish. Their story does not appear in the tidy registers of Louisiana's great houses. It is etched instead in the margins, in the fearful folklore of the bayou, in parish records where births and deaths are marked with strange annotations. To understand the infant's hand in the jar, one must go back nearly a century, to 1842, when Baron Klaus von Armfeld first arrived from the Old World. A Prussian aristocrat of imposing presence and even more imposing ideas, he purchased 10,000 acres of swamp, fever-ridden, desolate land no one else dared claim. He brought with him a fortune, a library of esoteric volumes on alchemy and bloodlines, and his two younger sisters, Liesel and Margaret, whose eerie, mirrored beauty was matched only by their unsettling silence. He christened his new estate Belle Reve, the beautiful dream, and began building a mansion that seemed to rise out of the mud in defiance of nature itself. The locals, a blend of Creole trappers and displaced Acadians, watched him with wary fascination. The Baron sought no company, hired no outsiders beyond the initial construction, and paid entirely in gold, asking only for solitude. To the parish clerk he claimed he was creating a sanctuary, a heaven where the purity of his ancient bloodline would be safe from the corrupting influences of the modern world. The clerk, dazzled by gold, nodded. He could not know that the corruption the Baron feared was not without, but within his own veins. Baron von Armfeld was a disciple of a dark and dangerous philosophy, a precursor to the eugenics that would stain the coming century with blood. He believed his family possessed a rare and potent genetic inheritance he called the Maya's kiss. In his journals he wrote of an ancient covenant, an ancestral bond with the marshes of northern Europe from which his line had sprung. This trait, he claimed, offered his bloodline a deeper connection to the hidden world, to the silent, thriving life of darkness and water. But it was fragile, easily diluted by what he called common clay. His true mission in the Louisiana swamps was not merely isolation. It was a terrible experiment, to distill and perfect this trait through controlled breeding, to shape his descendants until the Maya's kiss revealed its ultimate form. His sisters, Liesel and Margaret, were not simply his companions, they were his chosen vessels, within the walls of Belle Reve, far from the eyes of God or man. The Baron took both sisters as wives, sealing the family off from the outside world in a pact of blood and obsession. The first generation of children born at Belrive knew nothing beyond the Cypress Veil. They were taught their family was sacred, their blood holy, their purpose fixed to continue the great work. Their family tree was not to branch outward but to curl inward, like a serpent swallowing its tail. By the 1870s, the plantation had become a world unto itself, an opulent island of decay adrift in green water and Spanish moss. The second generation of von Armfelds, products of brother-sister unions, now bore children with their nieces, nephews and cousins. The web of kinship became so tangled that words like mother or father lost their meaning. There was only the family, a single organism bound by a shared secret biology. Meanwhile, whispers grew in the neighboring settlements of Thibodeaux and Morgan City. Trappers who strayed too near the von Armfeld property spoke of strange lights flickering in the mansion's windows at all hours and of faint, discordant music that clung to the night air like a foul mist. Locals whispered of pale, spectral figures glimpsed at dusk, moving with a disturbing grace across the verandas of Bel Rev. Their eyes, an identical, washed-out shade of grey, seemed to gleam from the shadows, watching without blinking. It was said the von Armfelds never perspired, even in Louisiana's stifling summer heat, and that their skin bore a faint, damp sheen, as though they carried the swamp within them. To outsiders, these were dismissed as backwater tales, the inventions of trappers and old women around a fire. Yet beneath the folklore, something far more terrible had taken root. The Baron's experiment was no myth, it was working, and its results were more grotesque than even rumor could capture. Within the mansion, the great work unfolded with the discipline of a secret laboratory. The family's ledgers, bound in cracked leather and marked by the Baron's spidery German script, contained no mention of crops or commerce, only meticulous records of births, pairings, and what they called undesirable outcomes. Infants born too malformed were not mourned but marked with a single chilling note: returned to the swamp. To them, the bayou was no graveyard but a living cradle, a place to absorb the imperfect and return its essence to the cycle from which they had sprung. The children who survived were unlike any others. They were eerily silent for years, communicating with each other through faint clicks and subtle gestures no outsider could decipher. They shrank from sunlight, spending their days in the mansion's shuttered halls and venturing outside only when dusk had settled. Each generation bore deeper alterations to flesh and bone, spines more supple than any human's, fingers and toes long and slender. The ledgers recorded the family's mounting excitement over a thin, translucent membrane now appearing between the digits of children born after 1890. This was the sign they had awaited. The Maya's kiss was finally manifesting. Even before one reached Bel Rev, the land itself gave warning. A scent clung to the air for nearly a mile. The sweet perfume of night jasmine and magnolia twisted into something darker, the rank, briny odor of stagnant water and decay. It was as though the bayou had seeped into the mansion's bones, saturating its wood, its plaster, even its silks with a primal reek. The sounds were just as unnerving, the endless hum of insects and frogs. The familiar chorus of Louisiana nights was punctuated by stranger noises, the heavy splash of something unseen moving through dark water, the faint, wet sound of footsteps on the verandas after midnight, the dissonant notes of a grand piano drifting through open windows, its once pristine tones now slowly collapsing out of tune. These sensory warnings formed a barrier more effective than any fence. For decades they kept strangers at bay. The parish sheriff made a habit of avoiding the long oak-lined drive. Tax collectors nailed notices to a tree at the edge of the property. Each time, a hooded figure would silently collect them and leave a box of cash, never showing a face, never speaking a word. In their self-imposed exile, the von Armfelds had achieved total isolation, and in that isolation, their dream festered into something monstrous. By the dawn of the 20th century, the house had passed into the hands of Isolde Armfeld, granddaughter and great-niece of the Baron, by the twisted mathematics of the family tree. She was a woman of unyielding will and almost religious devotion to her grandfather's vision. Under her rule, the experiment reached its peak. She became a high priestess of their strange cult, officiating over rituals that mingled old-world pagan rites with their own blood-centered theology. Her daughter, Ara, was their greatest hope yet, the living embodiment of the traits they had sought for generations. Her skin was cool and smooth, her eyes impossibly large and dark, and the webbing between her fingers and toes was nearly complete. She would sit for hours submerged in a marble bath, as though the water itself sustained her. Isolde believed Ara's child would be the culmination of everything, a being poised perfectly between land and water, between human and something far older. In the spring of 1931, Ara became pregnant. The father was her brother, also her cousin, also her uncle, and the family watched her swelling belly with a breathless, fanatical anticipation. This birth, they whispered, would either herald their new world or end the line forever. And beyond the cypress trees, the outside world remained unaware that something unimaginable was stirring in the heart of the Louisiana swamps. But the world beyond Belle Reve could not be held back forever. The Great Depression had tightened its grip on the nation, and even the remote swamps of Louisiana were not spared its weight. Poverty brought disease in its wake, pellagra, typhoid, and countless other afflictions bred by hunger and poor sanitation. For once, the State Board of Health acted boldly, dispatching young, idealistic doctors into the most isolated parishes to survey conditions, treat the sick, and report on what they found. Among them was Dr. Alistair Finch, a recent graduate of Tain University School of Medicine. He was a man of science and conviction, devoted to the principles of logic and observation, a firm believer that modern medicine could banish ignorance and superstition. Assigned to the reclusive Point Noir parish, Finch saw only a challenge. The stories of swamp ghosts and strange figures at the old von Armfeld estate struck him as the frightened folklore of isolated people. His work was to treat real diseases, not wrestle with legends. Yet his journey into the bayou would take him to the doors of Belle Reve itself, where he would encounter a biological horror that no textbook had prepared him for. A revelation that would force him to question the very definition of humanity. His presence in Point Noir was like a stone dropped into still water, rippling outward toward consequences neither he nor the von Armfelds could foresee. Finch began by tending to the poor settlements on the swamp's edge. He treated hookworm in children, lanced festering boils, and distributed quinine for malaria. Slowly he earned the cautious trust of the wary locals, and as he moved from home to home, he began to collect fragments of a darker history. An old trapper, his face like weathered hide, swore that no animal dared step onto the von Armfeld land, that even birds fell silent at its borders. A midwife confessed she had once seen a woman from the family swimming in the bayou at night, cutting through the water with a speed and grace no human should possess. Every account, no matter how varied, returned to the same refrain: the family was cursed, marked by something unholy from the swamp. To approach them was to invite madness or death. Finch, ever the rationalist, catalogued these stories as examples of local superstition, a psychological shield against hardship and mystery. He theorized that the von Armfelds likely suffered from a hereditary illness, perhaps porphyria, which might explain their aversion to sunlight, or a thyroid condition that could account for their pallor and body temperature. To him, their legend was merely disease misunderstood. His first encounter with the truth came unexpectedly. Steering his boat through a narrow channel one afternoon, he noticed a figure on the muddy bank, half concealed by a curtain of Spanish moss. It was a young woman in a plain, old-fashioned white dress. She knelt at the water's edge, cupped her hands, and drank deeply, as if it were instinct more than choice. The scrape of his boat against a submerged log startled her. She turned, and for the briefest instant their eyes met. They were a pale, luminous grey, vast, unblinking, and filled not with fear, but with a strange, ancient curiosity. Then, with a movement too fluid to be human, she vanished into the swamp. Finch sat frozen, unsettled. He had not glimpsed a patient that day. He had seen something closer to a predator. A week later, the summons came. A small, silent boy paddled out of the mists to Finch's modest clinic and handed him a note written on yellowed vellum. The handwriting was elegant yet severe. It bore the name of Isolde von Armfeld. She requested, demanded, his presence at Belle Reve. Her daughter, heavy with child, was suffering complications, and with the family's midwife long dead, they required the skill of a physician. Payment was promised in gold, enough to secure Finch's clinic for a decade. Against his instincts, and despite the frantic warnings of the locals who had begun to care for him, Finch agreed. Duty and curiosity outweighed fear. Here was the chance to test his theories, to uncover the truth behind generations of rumor. He filled his bag with sterile instruments, antiseptic and chloroformed, steadying his nerves with the thought that he was an explorer about to step into uncharted terrain. He did not realize he was walking into a trap, not one of malice, but of revelation. The von Armfelds did not summon him to destroy him. They summoned him to witness, to see with clear, scientific eyes the culmination of a century's obsession. The journey to Bel Rev was a descent into another realm. Guided by the silent boy, Finch's boat wound through blackwater channels under a dense canopy of cypress that blotted out the sun. The air thickened with the smells of rot and wet earth. The swamp itself seemed to tighten around him, as though warning him to turn back. But the current, and his own resolve, carried him deeper toward the heart of the von Armfeld secret. The sounds of the swamp shifted as Finch was ferried deeper, the constant drone of insects fading into a heavy, watchful silence. After nearly an hour, the channel widened into a broad, dark lagoon, and from the mist rose the mansion itself, ghost-like, monumental and dreadful. Its once grand columns were streaked with green mildew, and the white paint had peeled away to expose the grey bones of weathered timber. Shutters hung crooked from tall windows as dark as empty sockets. The gardens, once manicured, had surrendered to the swamp vines coiled around marble statues, strangling them, and cattails grew thick in the cracked basins of ornate fountains. And yet, despite the ruin, the house lived. In an upper window, a single lamp burned, a solitary, watchful eye piercing the gloom. The pirogue bumped against a crumbling stone landing, and even before Finch could step out, the massive oak doors creaked open as if stirred by the house itself. Beyond the threshold stretched a cavernous hallway, and in its center stood the waiting silhouette of a woman, Isolde von Armfeld. She was tall and spectral, her frame cloaked in a severe, high-collared black dress that seemed a relic of another century. Her face bore the stark, cutting lines of faded aristocracy, skin almost translucent in its pallor. But it was her eyes that transfixed Finch, the same pale, unearthly grey as the girl he had seen at the water's edge, sharp and intelligent, yet devoid of warmth. Without a greeting or gesture, she turned, and he was compelled to follow her inside. The interior of Bel Rev was a vast hollow of fading splendor. The air was damp and cold, laced with the swamp's brine and a cloying sweetness like flowers left too long to rot. Priceless European furnishings lay draped in dust-shrouded sheets, while gold fleur-de-lis wallpaper curled away from the walls in long, damp ribbons. Along the corridor hung portraits, every canvas depicting the same pallid faces, sharp bones and haunting grey eyes. Not a single mirror could be found. From above came sounds that chilled Finch instantly, the rhythm of strained breathing, a low groan, followed by the wet slap of water. He recognized the cadence of labor pains, but that other sound, the splashing, did not belong. Isolde led him up the grand staircase, its banister unlit, shadows clinging like a veil. The air thickened with heat and humidity, and the scent of marsh gas pressed in, suffocating. The sounds grew louder, wetter, more urgent. She stopped before a pair of heavy mahogany doors and turned toward him. "My daughter is strong," she murmured, her voice low and guttural, carrying the weight of a ritual. "She bears the future of our line. The child is eager, but the vessel resists." The word struck Finch like a blow. Vessel, not mother. It was the language of experiment, not kinship. "You will ensure the child is born," she continued, her grey eyes unyielding. "Whatever must be done. The child is all that matters. The vessel is expendable." Before he could protest the cruelty, she pressed open the doors, and the sight within stole his breath. The chamber was a grand bedroom, but its center had been remade into something unnatural. Set into the floor was a massive porcelain basin, like a surgeon's installation, filled with dark water piped straight from the bayou. Floating within, pale and straining, was the girl he had glimpsed before, Alara. Her body trembled with pain, her belly swollen and immense, her face twisted in agony. With each contraction, her hand slapped weakly against the porcelain, sending ripples across the stagnant surface. Finch's training surged forward, guiding him past horror into duty. He hurried to her side, reached into the tub, and recoiled at once. Her skin was clammy, unnaturally cold, her pulse faint and erratic. She was sliding into shock, her breath shallow, her body failing. She must be removed from this water. He snapped, turning to Isolde and the two silent grey-eyed figures who stood in the doorway. "She needs warmth, a bed, blankets. If she remains here, she will die." Isolde only smiled faintly, her expression a mixture of pity and certainty. "The water is her element," she said, calm as stone. "It soothes her. It calls to the child." The hush of the swamp pressed in as the last insect calls faded, leaving only a heavy, watchful silence. For an hour the pirogue glided onward until the waterway opened into a vast, shadowed lagoon. There, looming through the mist like an apparition, stood the mansion. It was at once magnificent and dreadful. The grand pillars were streaked with mildew, the paint peeled to expose grey timbers weathered by time. Shutters sagged from tall, vacant windows, and the once celebrated gardens had surrendered to the swamp, vines strangling marble statues, cattails filling the bowls of dry fountains. Yet the house was not dead. From an upper window a single lamp glowed, a lonely yellow eye staring into the gloom. The boat touched a ruined stone landing. Before Finch could rise, the mansion's immense oak doors swung inward of their own accord. Inside the threshold stood a woman's silhouette. She was Isolde Armfelt, tall, gaunt, robed in a severe black dress that belonged to another century. Her face was pale and angular, almost translucent, its aristocratic severity unsettling. But her eyes bound him in place. They were the same piercing grey as the girl he had glimpsed by the shore, sharp, brilliant, and utterly devoid of warmth. Without a word, without offering a hand, she turned and led him inside. The interior was a cavern of grandeur in ruin. The air was cool, damp, laced with the swamp's odor, but tainted with a cloying sweetness, like flowers left too long to rot. Priceless furnishings lay hidden beneath yellowing sheets. The wallpaper, once patterned with golden fleur-de-lis, sagged from the walls in long, damp strips. As they passed through the great hallway, Finch noticed a striking absence. No mirrors anywhere. Instead, portraits lined the walls, all of figures sharing the same pale skin, sharp bones, and uncanny grey eyes. From above came muffled, rhythmic sounds, a strained moan followed by an odd, wet splash. Finch's training recognized the cries of labor, but the sound of water was wrong, unnatural. Isolde led him up a sweeping staircase, unlit and stifling. The air grew thicker, hotter, the smell of brine and marsh gas nearly suffocating. The splashing intensified. Before a pair of massive mahogany doors, she halted. Her voice, low and guttural, broke the silence. "My daughter is strong. She bears the future of our line. The child is eager, but the vessel resists." The word vessel sent a chill down Finch's spine. It was not the language of a mother, but of one describing an experiment. Her eyes fixed on him, she continued, "You will do what is necessary. The child is all that matters. The vessel is expendable." Before he could object, she threw the doors open. Inside, the chamber was a grotesque transformation of luxury. A grand four-poster bed dominated the room, yet in its center a porcelain tub had been built into the floor, filled with dark water from the bayou. Submerged within lay the girl, Alara, the same figure Finch had seen at the shore. Her pale body writhed weakly, her distended belly rising like an island above the murk. Her hands beat faint splashes against the porcelain as pain twisted her face. Professional instinct overpowered Finch's shock. He rushed to her side, checking pulse and breath. The water was cold, far colder than any birth bath should be. Her skin was clammy, her pulse faint, her breath shallow. Hypothermia was stealing her strength. He turned urgently to Isolde. "Get her out of the water. She must be warmed, she's slipping into shock." Isolde did not move. A faint, almost pitying smile touched her lips. "The water is her element," she replied evenly. "It soothes her. It calls to the child." The infant's eyes were vast and unbroken pools of black, lacking iris or sclera, and they fixed on him with an unnerving calm, an awareness that was ancient and disturbingly intelligent. It did not wail. Instead, its small mouth opened to reveal rows of needle-fine teeth, and a soft reptilian clicking sound filled the air. At once, the gathered Armfelt family exhaled in a single breath of triumph. "Valendong," Isolde whispered, her voice quivering with reverence. "Perfection." In that moment, the truth crystallized for Finch. The isolation, the legends, the generations of tightly bound bloodlines. It had never been about strengthening humanity. It had been about stripping humanity away. Their goal was not purity but regression, a return to what they believed was their primal form. The child in his hands was not a malformed human. To them it was success incarnate, a creature born of the swamp, a seamless union of mammal and amphibian, the apex of their vision. Paralyzed, Finch stood with the grotesque newborn in his grasp. Isolde advanced, her movements deliberate. She took the infant gently, not as a grandmother cradling kin, but as an artist presenting a masterpiece. "You see, doctor," she murmured, her tone low and entrancing, "or man of science must admire its beauty, its purity. We have cast aside the frailties of the sunlit world. We have returned to the source. We are the children of the Maya." The creature turned its enormous black eyes toward her, and the clicking softened into a sound that resembled recognition, an acknowledgement of belonging. Finch scanned the family's faces, their expressions alight with exultation, and he saw it. The same unblinking eyes, the same reptilian stillness. This was not a regression. This was the future they had claimed for themselves. His training snapped him back to reason, a thread of sanity in the madness. On the bed, Alara lay motionless, her blood pooling into the sheets. The family had forgotten her entirely in their rapture. The mother, Finch said sharply, "She's hemorrhaging. Without intervention, she'll die." Isolde cast him a glance, dismissive and cold. Her gaze quickly returned to the child in her arms. "The vessel has fulfilled its purpose," she replied flatly. "Its shell is broken, but its seed endures, a worthy sacrifice." The sheer cruelty of her words jolted Finch. This was not merely eccentric belief. It was monstrous in its absence of human empathy. He had to escape, had to carry word of what he had seen, though he doubted anyone would believe him. He began edging backward toward the door, mind racing. But the two arm-felt men who had stood like statues now shifted to bar his way. Their silence left no doubt they had permitted him to witness their triumph, but he would not be permitted to leave. "You will remain with us, Doctor," Isolde said, still gazing at the infant. "There is much for you to record. Your scientific eye will be invaluable. You shall become the first chronicler of our new era." The realization struck him like a blow. He was their prisoner. His medical bag sat open on a nearby table. His eyes darted to the glass vial of chloroform, the weighty ether canister beside it. Reckless, desperate, yet it was the only chance he had. He would need a distraction. Masking his resolve, Finch inclined his head, feigning compliance. "You're right," he said evenly, forcing steadiness into his voice. "This is extraordinary. I must take notes, perhaps preserve a specimen for study." The words pleased her. The notion of their triumph being immortalized through science appealed to her pride. "Yes," she answered softly, stroking the hybrid child's webbed hand. "Look, the formation is exquisite, a perfect specimen." As Finch edged toward his bag, the family observed him with interest, their vigilance slackening. They believed him converted, another mind won over by the splendor of their creation. That false assumption was precisely what he had counted on, along with the dim candlelight and the volatile ether fumes he was about to unleash. With painstaking slowness, he unlatched the bag. One hand closed around a thick glass specimen jar. The other gripped the cold weight of the ether canister. His pulse thundered in his ears. "I'll need better light," he murmured, moving toward a tall candelabrum near a wall of heavy velvet curtains. The two men shadowed his steps, still keeping close. Leaning in as though to adjust the flames, he twisted the valve on the canister. A hiss of nearly invisible vapor began to escape, flooding the air with its sweet, suffocating stench. Time was measured now in seconds. With sudden, desperate force, Finch swung the canister into the head of one of the men. The blow dropped him instantly. At the same moment, Finch hurled the open chloroform bottle into the candelabrum. Liquid struck fire. The room erupted. A blue flash raced through the air as the ether and chloroform vapors ignited, and the ancient curtains ignited like kindling. Flames leapt up the peeling wallpaper, spread across the dry timber, and swallowed the bed frame. In an instant, the chamber became an inferno. The Armfelts, their composure annihilated, dissolved into panic. Isolde shrieked, clutching the monstrous infant tight against her chest as she retreated from the blaze. The second man lunged for Finch, his face twisted in rage, but the doctor was already moving. His focus narrowed to one thing: proof. The world had to see. He tore open his bag, seized the scalpel, and rushed to the blood-soaked bed. Taking the entire creature was impossible. With one swift, grim cut, he severed its small webbed hand and dropped it into the specimen jar, sealing the lid. The act was grotesque, yet in his mind utterly necessary. The fire roared higher. Smoke clogged his throat, his eyes watering as he staggered toward the door. Through the haze he glimpsed Isolde, her hair ablaze, her face contorted with hatred. She screamed at him, not in English or German, but in the same clicking tongue of the swamp. Her words ended in a shriek as the ceiling collapsed, burning beams crashing down to bury her and the abomination forever. Finch stumbled into the hall, choking on smoke. The house shook and cracked around him as the fire spread, turning the mansion into a collapsing furnace. Voices screamed from unseen rooms, but the inferno drowned them out. He plunged down the grand staircase, dodging falling embers, lungs seared by the heat. The house groaned like a dying leviathan. At last, he burst through the great oak doors into the night. Cool air enveloped him as he collapsed on the wild lawn, gasping. The specimen jar clutched to his chest as if it were salvation itself. Behind him, Bel Rev was a vision of apocalypse. Flames tore from the windows, painting the sky a hellish orange. The lagoon mirrored the blaze as though the swamp itself was aflame. He lay transfixed, watching as the roof caved in and the grand facade crumbled in thunderous ruin. The von Armfeldt's dream, their perfection, was reduced to ash, devoured by fire. For what felt like endless hours, he remained on the grass, staring at the smoldering wreckage. When the silence fell, it was deeper than anything he had ever known. Then slowly the swamp reclaimed its voice. Frogs croaked, insects sang, a deafening chorus as if nature itself rejoiced, offering a dirge for the horror erased from its heart. No help would come. The glow would be visible for miles, but the locals would not intervene. They would only whisper that the devil had claimed what was his, then bar their doors. As the first light of dawn filtered through the cypress, streaking the smoke with pale pink and grey, Finch stirred at last. He rose shakily, the specimen jar still pressed against his chest. He was drained, shaken to his core, and everything he thought he knew about the world had been appended. Yet he survived, and he carried proof. The small boat remained where the silent boy had left it, and with one final glance at the smouldering skeleton of the estate, he pushed off into the swamp, leaving the nightmare of Bel Rev behind. The return to civilization felt unreal, a disorienting break from the horrors he had endured. Dr. Alistair Finch was no longer the confident, eager scientist he once had been. What emerged was a hollow-eyed, haunted survivor, burdened with a dreadful understanding. He went directly to Sheriff Bodrow in Toledo, laying out his ordeal. He spoke of the summons, the decayed mansion, the strange family, the abomination he had delivered, and the fire that consumed it all. To support his testimony, he presented the specimen jar containing the tiny webbed hand. The sheriff, a pragmatic, heavy-set man, listened quietly, his expression shifting from intrigue to pity. When Finch finished, Bodrow dismissed the tale with a shake of his head. He claimed Finch must have fallen victim to swamp fever, known to cause vivid hallucinations. The fire, he said, was nothing unusual. Told plantations burned often due to faulty wiring and brittle timber. As for the hand, he refused to examine it closely, brushing it off as a likely deformity born of inbreeding, exaggerated by fevered imagination. His official record marked the tragedy as an accident, and he advised Finch to rest. All that Finch had endured, his evidence, his warning, was cast aside as delusion. Unwilling to accept dismissal, Finch traveled to New Orleans, seeking validation from his former professors at Tulane University. Here, too, he found only rejection. His story was seen as shameful, a blemish on the reputation of a once promising physician. The specimen was studied but attributed to known genetic disorders, the result of generations of consanguinity. The precise structure, the elements beyond human design, were ignored. His testimony of phosphorescent veins and inhuman features was deemed a symptom of trauma-induced madness. His words, his desperate truth, were categorized as hysteria. Within months, his career lay in ruins. Quietly, he was urged to withdraw indefinitely from medicine. The guardians of accepted science had shut their gates, refusing to acknowledge a reality that unsettled their order. From that point onward, Alistair Finch lived as a recluse. He retreated into a small apartment in the French Quarter of New Orleans, abandoning his profession entirely. His life became consumed by the need to record every detail of what he had endured. He filled countless journals, sketches of the manor, portraits of the von Armfeldt family, anatomical diagrams of the creature he had delivered, and endless pages describing their twisted philosophy and their obsession with returning to a primal aquatic state. These writings became his only anchor to the truth as he knew it, though to others they read like the ravings of a brilliant but broken mind. The jar never left him. The severed hand sat on his desk, a grim relic of that night. And in humid hours, when the city air hung heavy, he sometimes saw a faint green, blue glow pulsed inside the murky fluid, a ghostly spark of the life it once belonged to. The world dismissed his account as fevered fiction. Officially, the von Armfeldt family perished in the fire of 1931, their legacy ending in tragedy. The land passed into state hands for unpaid taxes and was later claimed by the swamp itself. Bel Rev crumbled, devoured by the bayou. Yet the legends endured. For decades after, trappers and fishermen whispered of strange sightings near the ruins. Shapes gliding beneath the waters too massive for alligators, pale figures slipping silently through the lagoon on moonless nights. Muddy banks revealed prints not quite human-long, clawed toes, with traces of webbing stretched between them. Dismissed as folklore, these stories linger as swamp-born ghost tales. Still, they pose a question that chills the blood. Did Dr. Alistair Finch truly witness the end of the von Armfeldt line? Or did something survive? Perhaps Finch had not merely witnessed their end, but their ultimate transformation. The flames may not have destroyed them, but freed them, cutting the final tether that bound them to the sunlit world of air and land, allowing them to embrace fully the dark, waterlogged home they had so long desired. Decades later, after Finch's death in 1978, his journals and the specimen jar were discovered in his small apartment. They were passed to a minor historical archive dedicated to Louisiana folklore, where they were quietly catalogued and largely ignored. But with the rise of genetic science, curiosity stirred once more. In secret, researchers performed a DNA analysis on a preserved sample from the hand. The results were inconclusive, yet profoundly unsettling. The report stated that while the material was unmistakably human, it carried an abnormally high percentage of junk DNA, structured in unusual patterns. Even more disturbing were the markers resembling those found not in primates, but in amphibians and certain deep-sea fish. The conclusion was stark: the tissue represented a genetic anomaly beyond explanation and worthy of further study. Yet no official research was ever funded, and the matter was quietly buried. In this new light, Finch's so-called madness seemed less like delusion and more like testimony, a terrifying glimpse of something science was not yet ready to face. The saga of the von Armfeldts is more than a family tragedy. It is a meditation on the dangers of obsession and isolation. It reveals the peril of clinging to a single idea until it becomes wholly unquestionable and corrosive. The family sought self-perfection, but in doing so abandoned the essence of humanity, compassion, empathy, and connection. They turned bloodline into dogma, trapping themselves in their own design. Their dream was not a dream at all, but a nightmare of biological determinism, a belief that flesh alone defines us, and that it can be sculpted into something greater. They succeeded in altering their bodies, but the cost was the surrender of their souls. What they created was not an ascension, but a descent. Life adapted to the swamp, yet severed from the light of humanity. Their true legacy is not the monstrous child born that night, but the question they leave behind. Where is the boundary between visionary science and monstrous obsession? In their eyes, they were not monsters but pioneers, prophets of a new existence. To the outside world, their tale remains a warning of inbreeding, of fanaticism, of the madness born of too much isolation. Yet perhaps there was something deeper at play. Perhaps they had stumbled onto an ancient inheritance buried in us all, a vestige from the first creatures that crawled out of the oceans. They sought to reverse that journey, to descend back into the primal waters, to undo the march of evolution itself. What Dr. Finch witnessed that night was not simply the collapse of a family, but the fruition of a philosophy, one that exalted blood purity above the human spirit. The jar, sealed in a climate-controlled vault, remains a grim artifact, pale, webbed fingers floating in silence, a relic of a forbidden lineage, a crime with no trial evidence for a truth no one dares to name. And yet the swamp is vast. It conceals its secrets well. In the black, nutrient-rich waters of Louisiana, one cannot help but wonder, did the von Armfeldts' perfection survive? Does their silent lineage still endure, waiting in the dark just beyond human sight? The tale of the von Armfeldts forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth, that the greatest monsters are not always born from the outside, but from within, from our own bloodlines, from our own obsessions, from our own dreams that twist into nightmares. It is a story of what happens when we stare inward too long, until the world itself disappears and only the fevered whisper of our own beliefs remains. The fire at Belle Reve reduced the mansion to ash, but the story did not die. It lingers still, haunting the fragile boundary between science and superstition, a ghostly reminder of what waits when humanity dares to step across a threshold best left sealed.